Okay, by way of introduction, I've been a lawyer in Vancouver since 1989. For 25 years, I was a well known immigration lawyer, specializing in skilled workers, business immigrants, and helping Canadian employers seeking to hire foreign nationals. In 2014, my career went sideways when I moved to Ottawa for 7 years to become the chairperson of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. Since returning to Vancouver in 2021, I worked for 3 years for the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants, the regulatory body for immigration consultants in Canada. I was a vice chair of their discipline tribunal where I heard complaints about immigration fraud and consultant misconduct. I've been in the trenches for a long time and I've seen a lot, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Your other witnesses have told you much about the good, and there is a lot of good. But today, I'm going to tell you about the bad and the ugly because you need to hear this. So let's start with temporary foreign workers and LMIA fraud and abuse. LMIA stands for Labor Market Impact Assessment and is a key document that allows a foreign worker to get a work permit and, in many cases, permanent residence. LMIAs are so valuable that there is an underground market for them. People will pay tens of thousands of dollars for an LMIA that will allow them to work at a lousy job, but with the end goal of permanent residence as a possibility. I recommend you read my discipline decision last year in the Barawal case, where young men from India were paying $40,000 to get an LMIA to work as a truck driver for an employer that actually owned no trucks. Their labor was subcontracted out and they were paid only $10 an hour. When they complained, their consultant threatened to arrange their deportation. So they continued to work in slave-like conditions until their permanent residence came through. LMIA abuse like this is happening everywhere and on a huge scale. Next item. Police checks and CSIS background checks. Police checks from certain countries are not worth the paper they're written on, and we need to stop kidding ourselves about that. The Foreign Minister of India has gone on the record warning Canada that we are admitting serious criminals from their country. I recommend you read a paper I wrote earlier this year for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute about CSIS background checks for prospective immigrants who are suspected of terrorism or organized crime. In a bizarre decision related to my former Human Rights Tribunal, we somehow concluded that CSIS background checks are not a matter of national security and make immigration officers vulnerable to a human rights complaint for ordering one. Next item. This recent push to prioritize French-speaking immigrants needs a rethink. Under the express entry system, French speakers are so highly prioritized, they are now displacing even healthcare workers in the selection process. Immigration lawyers and consultants are now coaching their clients to take French classes to boost their chances. The express entry system was designed to admit people with valuable job skills. With all due respect to my Francophone friends, how is French a job skill, especially in places like Western Canada? And we all know the majority of these French-speaking immigrants are from developing countries who may have no other valuable job skills to ensure their success in Canada. Next item, regional immigration programs, where foreigners are granted permanent residence based on a promise to live in Quebec or some other province, or the new rural community immigration pilot. All of these destination programs are a waste of time and will be until you do something to enforce the regional residency requirement after they arrive. These programs are all actively promoted as the backdoor route into Canada. Either issue conditional visas or invoke the notwithstanding clause or do something. Otherwise, we should quit wasting time on these regional destination programs. The next item is citizenship fraud. It's way bigger than you think it is, and we need to stop the fraud. And we need to stop giving away Canadian citizenship so freely and with such low thresholds. And please bring back mandatory in-person citizenship swearing-in ceremonies. Have we really devalued our citizenship that much that we're happy to let that happen online? A person can go through all their immigration, temporary, permanent residence applications, and now citizenship ceremonies without ever actually meeting a Canadian official. My last item is about Canada's fertility crisis, and it's worse than it ever was. Immigration was supposed to fix it. I've been working in this area for longer than a generation, and I have to be honest and ask, has mass immigration made conditions better or worse for young people thinking about starting a family? We keep admitting people faster than we can build housing for them, so of course the costs go up. We need to start having an honest conversation about this. That's my short list, and I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Thomas, I read some of your articles, and they seem to share one theme. That is, if you take tempting incentives put together with weak consequences, it equals predictable abuse. So if Parliament were to fix one thing, what do you think is the priority from an immigration standpoint?
Well, my favorite saying is what you permit, you promote. And what gets permitted by RRC, I can guarantee, is very strongly promoted through the immigration industry around the world. So that's a good thing to remember. I think what I mentioned, I think is most important thing for us right now is to really do a better job of doing background checks on people that are coming to this country. I think that we're allowing huge numbers of people in under temporary status that we didn't do in the past, and we're not doing as thorough background checks on those people that are coming in under that temporary status. And I think that we can see that that has been linked to problems. So that would be my number one fix that I would encourage the committee to look at.
Thanks. You also cited a sharp rise in inland refugee claims, which has resulted in a major backlog, of course. In your view, what proportion of current asylum claims are driven by protection needs versus people that are just system shopping, looking for a good deal for citizenship?
Well, I think the facts speak for themselves, right? I mean, that a lot of the people that have applied for refugee status from within Canada are people that have their status, their temporary status expiring. We've had a huge spike from citizens of Mexico. We had done away with the visitor visa requirement for Mexican citizens a second time in 2016 up until 2024 was a mistake. It happened in the early 2000s as well. It led to a big spike of inland claims. And now we're seeing the biggest number are inland claims are from Indian nationals, and many of them came here under temporary status. So you do have to question, what is the underlying motivation?
In your experience, what would you estimate are the number of so-called legitimate asylum claims, people who truly are fearing for their lives?
Well, that's a little bit hard to say, in all honesty. I was not a refugee focused lawyer in my day, but I do speak to people who are adjudicators at the IRB from time to time, and I think that there often is a feeling, I think, within the tribunal itself as to whether or not how hard we want to scrutinize applications for people coming in, because I think that the bigger question is, what is Canada's overall goal in terms of bringing people in? There are some people that believe we should be bringing in 1 million people a year, right? The Century Initiative that wants to have 100 million people in Canada by the end of the century. If your push is we need bodies, we need people, we're not very selective as to where they come from, then you're not going to press very hard on those things, are you? You're going to let people walk across the road, self-select themselves as they did crossing Roxham Road when that was open, or other people just coming here in temporary status and making artificial refugee claims. And I think that that's largely driven by what the government of Canada really sees as its objective for bringing people into the country, and on what sort of scale.
Sorry to interrupt you, but are you saying though that this is the government's direction or the government's lack of direction so that those folks at the IRB think, oh, well, you know what, I'm going to err on the side of letting this person in because it seems like that's what the government wants? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I'm sort of hinting that way, although of course this is not a empirical study. This is just my gut feeling based on people I've talked to.
So I guess to carry on along those lines, you spent time with the Immigration Consultant Society. What kinds of changes or improvements do you think could be made there? I mean, there's lots of issues with consultants. I think there's been attempts to get it under control in Canada, but we know that there's lots of people from outside the country that are maybe difficult to control. But do you have any suggestions on what we could change or improve on that front?
Well, I think that we need to probably do a better job, and I think there are moves to be a little bit more selective in terms of who we permit to be consultants. I mean, the kinds of conduct that I saw as a tribunal member was unbelievable, and a lot of people, frankly, should not be regulated at all. They're not suitable for that, and I think that we need to be more selective of that. The other massive problem, I've been told that there are more unlicensed immigration consultants in the province of Punjab in India than there are more than there are of all fully licensed immigration consultants in Canada. So the problem is astronomical, and I don't think we have a good sense of how big the numbers are.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the One Touch system, but we had some testimony here a couple of weeks ago
One
about
minute.
that, where the CBSA is essentially allowed to funnel people into the so-called low-risk category, which then allows those people to, tap a few buttons in a system and get into the country and do all their paperwork after the fact. Are you familiar with that, and do you think that that's contributing to some of our asylum problems?
I'm not really familiar with that system, but I think that we've really moved away. When I started practicing law, every person who applied for permanent residence in Canada sat down, had an interview with an immigration officer. There was a lot more interaction going on, and we've really done away with that. And so now it's like a faceless process. And as I said in my opening remarks, we don't even insist that people come in for a swearing-in ceremony when they become a Canadian citizen. I think it's sad, and I think we're robbing the immigrants themselves of that opportunity to celebrate that moment.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Redekop. Next, we go to Mr. Fragiscatos for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In fact, Chair, you'll find that there has been a pushback, one that I agree with and one that I think the vast majority of MPs agree with, that moving away from web meetings for citizenship ceremonies is not something that you'll see being the norm going forward. It was necessary during the pandemic, but the point is taken, Mr. Thomas, that there is an appropriate way to do things, and in-person ceremonies is absolutely what we should continue to pursue. I did want to begin with you, actually, sir. If you could talk about, you had a number of points that you went through, but I want to hear your thoughts further on the rural side of things. You talked about the residency requirement in particular. You have some ideas there to offer, I believe. Could you expand on your points in your testimony with respect to that?
Well, I recall a conversation years ago with a Chinese immigration consultant that was using the Manitoba Business Program extensively for her clients. And I remember asking her, what do you think out of your clients that are going through this program, Manitoba, how many of them do you think are really going to end up in Vancouver at the end of this? And she looked at me with this really funny look. And she said, all of them, of course. And you see, that's the problem, is that because the Charter guarantees people freedom of mobility, it's really marketed that way. And so if there's a lower threshold for immigration under a regional program or to go to an underpopulated province, then that's going to be exploited, and it will be marketed to prospective immigrants around the world as a backdoor route to end up in Vancouver, Toronto, or wherever it is that they really want to go to. And so I just raised that because that is a reality that's out there in the trenches. And as I say, during the 1990s and the early 2000s under the Quebec Investor Program, it was known that 92% of the people that came through that program did not remain in Quebec. It was well known, and those statistics were published. And there was no incentive to do anything about that. And so I just flagged that to say, look, it's a reality, and it's nice to have those programs. It would be great to attract people to those regions, but we should hold them to that. If that's the deal that we made with them to immigrate to this country, we should hold them to that deal and not let them just walk away and abuse that. And that's what I want you to be aware of.
Do you have examples of other countries that have pursued similar programs, whether they are pilot programs or whether they're pilot programs that evolved into something more permanent, where the intent of the program was, in fact, guaranteed that individuals stayed in the region that they initially migrated to?
I can't say that I am aware of any programs quite like that. Although I know that in the past there have been discussions about issuing people, say, like a 5-year conditional visa. We used to issue conditional permanent residence visa for entrepreneur immigrants. They were given a visa that had terms and conditions that had to be satisfied within 2 years of landing, or they risked losing that status. And so there have been mechanisms in the past that have worked well, I wouldn't say that worked really well because the enforcement wasn't very good. But, you know, again, like I said, if that's the deal we made with somebody and said, we're going to let you come into Canada, but the deal is you got to settle in this region here because that's where we need you. I don't think we should be ashamed of holding people to that in whatever way we need to do that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'll go to.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing before us today. Mr. Thomas, I'm going to like to start with you, sir. It has recently come to light that some asylum claimants are being admitted into Canada before their background checks are fully completed. That's something you alluded to in your opening testimony. Considering your known stance on the need for rigorous security measures, how do you assess the potential security implications and dangers associated with the current asylum processing system?
Well, I think the proof is there, right? I mean, do we remember the El Didi family, the father and son that were in the advanced stages of planning a mass terrorist attack in Toronto? And we were advised by the Americans about this. We'd already granted those folks permanent residence, and we're about to grant them citizenship. And it surfaced that El Didi, I think his name was the senior, was filmed in an ISIS video in 2015 where some poor person was being beheaded. I mean, we have been reckless, I'm sorry to say that, in terms of being naive or just assuming that most of the people here are legitimate people or not like that. What you permit, you promote. And if we're not doing a thorough job of checking people's backgrounds, particularly for terrorism or organized crime backgrounds, then we'll attract those people into Canada. We will attract those people into Canada. And I think the other big mistake we made, which was dropping the visa requirement for Mexican nationals in 2016, I think we're seeing evidence of cartel activity in Canada. And I think that that was another big mistake that we made. It was naive for us to think that that wouldn't happen. And so I don't think it's wrong for us to inconvenience people, to hold up their applications for a little bit longer while we do our due diligence and satisfy ourselves about who they are. We shouldn't feel shame about that. And I again point to that decision I mentioned in my opening remarks. There's a long article about that, but we're somehow second guessing ourselves as to whether this is right or not. And we shouldn't second guess ourselves. We have a right to know if people have a terrorist or organized crime background before we admit them into Canada.
Thank you. I certainly remember the LDD case, the father-son combination. They actually lived in my riding in Richmond Hill, Mr. Thomas. Now, recently, we've heard testimony at this committee of the government having implemented a one-touch system. Basically, when somebody comes into Canada, they have an initial face-to-face with an officer where some initial questions are asked. And following that, a biometric is taken, a picture of their eye and their thumbprint, and then they're provided a questionnaire to take home with them, and they have 45 days to self-complete this form. In those 45 days, they're allowed into the country to go on with their lives without us having completed the background check effectively. They call it an initial stage to help people come through faster. How do you think? What do you feel about that system? I wonder if you could provide any comments on that.
I think we're inviting people to take advantage of us, and I think I think we're probably known around the world for being a little bit naive about these things. And I know that Australia years ago was having a big problem with people, asylum claimants, and when they decided that they were going to park all their asylum claimants on an island, I can't remember exactly where it was, but rather than releasing people into the general population, they put them all onto a specific location, and suddenly they found, wow, suddenly the numbers dropped immensely.
1 minute.
Once they did that. And I think that, maybe we should be thinking ourselves about, are we sending the wrong message when we make it so easy for people to do these things? Because again, I'm not saying that everybody is an illegitimate asylum claimant. I'm not saying that at all. I've dealt with some very legitimate claims myself. They do exist, but we are making it an open invitation for people to abuse the system. and we should be very careful about
I
that.
only have a few seconds left, so let me ask you this: Are you aware of any immigration consulting companies in Canada outsourcing some of their services to immigration consultants in other countries that are not regulated?
Well, there's a system for consultants in Canada to have agents in foreign countries, which is how they generate a lot of their business. And as long as they register them, they're not really regulated agents. And of course, I don't think we really take a close examination of what's really happening there in these relationships. Obviously, I've dealt with some cases where it hasn't been.
Thank you, Mr.
on the
Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Menegakis. And now we have.
My next question is for Mr. Thomas. You highlighted security checks is a number one priority. My understanding is part of that process, the government actually outsourced to local security firms to provide those security checks and so forth. Can you give, what can you recommend this committee to do to improve on the accuracy and the security checks that we conduct for immigration purposes?
Well, it varies country to country, right? Some countries give us very reliable background checks, and we're very happy with those. Other countries, not so much. And in fact, there are a number of quasi-failed states around the world that we still receive immigrants from, and so I think that we're always worried about being labeled as being racist or being discriminatory by identifying certain people from certain parts of the world for extra scrutiny. But again, like I said, I don't think that we should be ashamed of that. We have a right to know people's backgrounds and to be satisfied that they're not a bad person coming into our country. And so I would discourage outsourcing as much as possible and to dedicate as much resources as we need to liaise with local law enforcement or other security authorities in those other countries where we're looking for background checks, and to take the time and not to feel bad about that. I think that we owe it to other Canadians that are already here.
Thank you. On a slightly different topic. So in an article, you indicated 35 years ago, international students were restricted, forbidden from working in Canada. Today, do you think that we should return to this policy so that the international student pool of labor has less effect on domestic job situations?
Well, as I said in that article, 30 years ago, we had about 35,000 foreign students a year in the country. It was a very low number, and they generally came here with enough resources to support themselves. What's happened through this long evolution of marketing foreign students coming, and it's a big business, is that more and more people are coming to Canada who don't have the financial resources to support themselves through their education period. And by necessity, they're having to go out there and take on these jobs. And in often cases, they're not even going to class to go out there and earn money to earn their keep, and often to pay back loans they've taken in their home country to finance this whole enterprise. And of course, with the goal of immigration, I think if we cut out the ability to work or limited it, we'd see a natural big drop-off on student visa applications. That would take a lot of strain off of healthcare and housing at the same time.
So in order to avoid to repeat the mess we've seen, do you think the international student study permit should be tied to our labor market needs?
10 seconds.
To be honest, I think that might be a little bit too complicated. I think the labor market opinions should really be focused on high-skilled jobs, not for working at Tim Hortons and that sort of thing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Ma.